to the end zone. Mack dives. Caught it for a touchdown. Buckeyes can do no wrong. And this is a beatdown.
Play snap. Benjamin breaks another tackle and another. Eno Benjamin, touchdown ASU.
And he sends a message up.
The craziest game of this college football weekend had to have been the Clemson-North Carolina matchup. The Tar Heels almost pulled off the upset. They got within 1 point, went for two, did not get it, ended up losing the ball game. I'm Chas Messman alongside.
I'm Dylan Wilhelm.
And I'm George Boyle.
This is the playoff committee, and we're going to start off with that game. How do you guys feel about Coach Mack Brown's decision to go for two?
Well, personally, I think going for two was the best decision North Carolina could have done there. Because we all know going to overtime against Clemson is not a good thing.
Well, no, yeah, they got more talent.
Exactly. Clemson is a much more well-rounded football team. So going up against Clemson there would not have gone well for the Tar Heels.
Yeah, I would love to play devil's advocate and say you got to kick that extra point, but I just don't think that's true. I love the decision. If it works, we're having a completely different conversation about how it was the best decision he's ever made. Even though it backfired, I still agree. You got to go for the win there. Show your guys that you really believe they can get it done.
Exactly. Let's put in a Herm Edwards quote, as we do a lot here at Arizona State. You play to win the game. Like, I absolutely love the decision. Have faith in your guys. You put one play to win the game. You know, it is what it is. And at the end of the day, I do think North Carolina is the second best team in the ACC, arguably. But they're not Clemson. They would have lost that game in overtime. And there's no denying that if they did go for the extra point and got it, that Trevor Lawrence would not have drove the Tigers down the field to win the ball game.
Exactly, and you don't want to go up against that Clemson defense either. They're solid.
Alrighty, so now we're going to go into our players of the week. George, who do you have?
Well, I'm going to go with the obvious answer here. I'm going to go with Tua Tagovailoa. Tua had 418 yards and 6 touchdown passes to beat for Alabama, number 2 Alabama at the time, to beat Ole Miss 59-31. And we always know Alabama always struggles against Ole Miss. It's always like a soft spot for them. So Tua coming into this game was hot, threw 6 touchdown passes, and it was just a great game for the Tide.
Yeah, and I know you had a similar Crimson Tide. It wasn't Tagovailoa, but it was his wide receiver.
You say he threw 6 touchdowns? 5 of those were to Devonta Smith, who also had 274 receiving yards. It was just a clinic by him, tearing through that Ole Miss Rebel defense.
He broke the record.
Easily the most impressive performance of the weekend for me.
Oh, absolutely. He was phenomenal. I was going to pick a player of the week. I was thinking Justin Fields. Just other than, the 2 Alabama boys, there wasn't really anyone that vastly stood out to me, except for one. I'm going with the donkey of the week, and that goes to Adrian Martinez. 47 passing yards and 3 picks, and they were all really bad picks. He had a 3.4 quarterback rating. Look, Martinez is a very good quarterback. There's no denying that. Like, he's extremely talented. However, I think the hype was just too much, and he just did not show up against Ohio State. They got routed 48-7. Obviously, the Buckeyes are a much better team, but for a player of Martinez's caliber or hype, you'd expect a little bit more than a 3.4 quarterback rating.
He didn't show up for the Cornhusker fans, and we know the Cornhusker fans are one of the strongest fan bases in the country, so they must have not been happy with that showing from the quarterback.
Yeah, Nebraska's definitely been a disappointing team to say the least. Obviously, they're not quite on the level of Florida State or, God knows about how bad Tennessee is right now. That is an absolute dumpster fire. But let's get into some teams that aren't a dumpster fire. We're going to go into the top 25 that we created as a committee this weekend. At 25, we have Cal, who's coming off a loss to Arizona State. Obviously, we're recording at the campus of Arizona State. 24, Virginia, another team coming off a loss. An undefeated team at 23, Wake Forest. 22, Michigan State. And 21, Michigan. We're going to start with Cal. Obviously, they lost the game. We'll talk more about ASU as we do have them, surprise, surprise, a little bit higher. But,
Well, Well, by default, we have to have them above Michigan State and Cal because they beat them.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, exactly. Head-to-head has to count for something.
Yeah.
It does.
And that's, in terms of my metrics, when I rank teams, I really rely on head-to-head records and eye test. I mean, you play to win the game. You can't just be like, if you see who's going to be on the field, there's never going to be any upsets. And that's what's, what makes college football great is it's not one on paper.
Exactly. Every game means something. So I think we got to keep Cal in the top 25 because they only have one loss. They were a ranked team, and they have one loss to ASU, who was another ranked team. So that's head-to-head rank play. So I think keeping Cal in the top 25 is a must.
I agree. Correct me if I'm wrong. They were number 15 last week when Arizona State beat them.
Yes, they were.
It
Absolutely.
seems a little extreme to me. The AP poll had Cal unranked. It seems a little extreme to me to drop a team more than 10 spots. I think people forget this team went into Seattle and beat a number 15 Washington. That's a quality win in my book. You got to keep them in the top 25 despite losing to what is now a top 20 team.
I think that they can really test their strengths this week because they play Oregon this week. The big dogs of the Pac-12, as people like to think. So I think, or big ducks was a better way to say this. So I think if they go in and they're able to beat Oregon, I think they'll secure themselves another higher spot in the top 20.
Yes.
ranking.
I want to say the reason that the AP dropped Cal has nothing to do with their defense. Their defense is absolutely phenomenal. They're legitimately a top 10, maybe to top 15 defense in the entire country. Evan Weaver has 77 tackles through 5 games. 77. Like,
That's
what?
insane.
I mean, come on. That is unreal. Justin Wilcox is a phenomenal defensive mind. He's one of the best defensive play callers in the entire country. The problem is their offense. And it doesn't help that they lost their starting quarterback, Chase Garbers, and now have to start Devon Monster, who let's face it,
Did not look good.
whenever he's been on the field, whether it be for Cal or UCLA, has been awful. And this kind of, this guy went to my second high school. So, it's kind of, you would think that I'd be cheering for the guy, like wanting to do well. However, the guy's just flat out not good enough.
It's not showing up.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll move on to Virginia. They looked decent against Notre Dame at the beginning of the game. And then the Irish, especially that Irish defensive line, just started to dominate the game. They ran away with it. And at the end of the day, I just think Notre Dame was a vastly better team. I expected this. I was expecting a double-digit encounter. So, yeah, the end score ended up being, what was the end score? 35-20. So they won by 15. See exactly, 2 touchdowns. I really think that's where, I expected it to be. UVA is a good football team. However, I don't see anything special with it. Bryce Perkins, we know what he can do, but I don't think he's great.
I think putting Virginia at 24 is a good thing. They've had some solid wins at Pitt. They won against Florida State at home. But going into South Bend and winning there is a really hard thing to do. And only losing by 2 touchdowns to a top football program is a huge thing for this Virginia team. So I think they have a decent schedule. They play at Miami this week, or next week, sorry. And after that, they have a bunch of lower-ranked ACC teams. They actually play UNC, who we were talking about before, so that could be a tough game for them. But I think they don't play any more ranked teams at the moment, so it may hurt their chances.
Well, they're playing the ACC.
Of course, the ACC.
The ACC right now is just not where it's at. And like you said, the toughest team that they got on their schedule is going on the road at North Carolina. So this is a realistic team that's probably going to win 9, maybe 10 games this season. And I think that's definitely not without or beyond the realms of possibility. However, I just don't see them being a top 15 team. I think they're between, the 20 to 25 ranking, and I think they're going to be around that area the entire year. Obviously, teams ahead of them will fall because chaos is going to happen. They're all going to end up playing each other. Exactly. The SEC West, they all going to play each other, and they're all top 10 teams. I mean, so yeah, that'll all work itself out. 23, Wake Forest. Another ACC team. They're undefeated right now. They beat North Carolina, which, is now looking like a very quality win. How do you guys feel about the Demon Deacons?
Well, that win against North Carolina is big for them. They showed that they are a real program, and North Carolina lost by 1 to Clemson. So they're trying to show that they're a football school. I get basketball in my head because when you think of Wake Forest, football's not the thing that comes to your head. Right?
like-
Is basketball though either?
Not necessarily. They do.
Yeah.
They do refer to it as the Harvard of the South. That's what they like to refer to themselves as. But they do play Clemson at Clemson. So
Yeah.
I'm worried about Wake Forest here. So 23 may be a peak for Wake Forest.
Before that Clemson game, though, you have Louisville, Florida State, and NC State all at home, and then you hit the road to Virginia Tech. That's not too tough of a schedule. Again, we're talking ACC. And I'm trying to gauge how to judge North Carolina victories. Because they did come within 1 point of Clemson, but they also lost to Appalachian State.
Exactly. There's
I'm
talent on
wondering-
the roster. Inconsistent talent. Obviously, when you have a freshman quarterback, he'll have his good days and his bad days. We've seen with the likes of, Bo Nix. We've seen with the likes of even Jaden Daniels, who's been extremely consistent. There are times where they do mess up, and he's looked like a true freshman.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think Virginia and Wake Forest are both programs that are on the rise.
Yes.
These are historically programs that are not necessarily known for being a great, football school. Obviously, Virginia is known more for their basketball coming off a national championship. However, we have to recognize that Bronco Mendenhall and Dave Clawson have just done a really good job with their programs in general. And, another ACC team, Mac Brown, they look like they're improving. Everybody else they're either improving or they suck. Like, it's Clemson and everybody else in the ACC. It's not their power year, and it's just kind of funny to look back a couple years ago. The whole ACC pitch at media days where, we're in the premier conference in college football. And we've all seen how that turned out. It's the SEC, and that's pretty prevalent.
Was it last year where Clemson had to play Pitt in the AFC, or not AFC, sorry, ACC championship game?
That was last year. Well, what was I going to say? So, essentially what the ACC has to do is everybody lines up to see who's going to play Clemson in the ACC championship game.
See who's going to lose to Clemson.
See who's going to lose to Clemson in the ACC championship game. So, I think with two small programs like Wake Forest and Virginia on the rise, hopefully in the years down the road, it'll give a little tough competition for Clemson, so they don't always just have a cakewalk to essentially the Final Four.
Yeah. And you always hope programs like Florida State can get back, bounce back. Miami get back to the level that they're known for. Would just make the ACC that much, and college football as a whole, that much better when those two teams are.
The next team at 22 that we have is Michigan State. Obviously, they're playing in a much tougher conference. They are in maybe the second toughest division in college football behind the SEC West. Right now, they're sitting at one loss to the Arizona State Sun Devils. Last week, the defense wasn't, what they usually are. However, the offense in back-to-back weeks has looked a lot better. Brian Lewerke seems to be getting things going. Elijah Collins is looking good. Darrell Stewart Jr. is a very good wide receiver. This Michigan State football team is really, really good, and they have a really, really good defense, arguably probably a top 3 defense in the entire country. Their run defense is the best in the country.
Yeah, I'll put up 19 points in the fourth quarter to secure that win. That's a big fourth quarter to show after getting shut out in the third. That's a way to bounce back and show that they're the real deal after a one loss to ASU.
Yeah, and the ASU loss was kind of all what we expected. It was going to be a defensive, low-scoring game, and whoever made the plays in the fourth quarter were going to win the game. And at the end of the day, Jaden Daniels on 4th down and 13 made a big run. Benjamin, let's say not Superman slam, Jordan-esque slam. Hyping him up a little bit. But, they made the plays at the end of the day, and the Spartans didn't.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see. We'll find out over these next 2 or 3 weeks if the Spartans are for real. Their next 3 games at Ohio State, at Wisconsin, and then they host Penn State. So we'll see how big of a challenger to Ohio State they really are.
I think they're going to make a game out of it. We're gonna talk more of an Ohio State spin on it. So when we talk about Ohio State, we might talk about it a little more. But that's this weekend coming up. I'm excited for. Obviously, this Ohio State-Michigan State game is definitely one of the better ones out there. How do you guys feel that Michigan State's offense will match up against Ohio State's defense with the likes of Chase Young and Jeff Okudah?
It's going to be hard if Lewerke has to try to leave the pocket.
Yeah.
Like you just mentioned, Chase Young. If they can get to him and force pressure, I don't see them really having much success, especially this game's in Columbus, and I do believe in home field advantage. So if that Ohio State's defense is really feeling off the crowd, arguably DBU as well, I'm not going to get into whether they are or not, but arguably produce some of the best defensive backs in the nation, it's going to be tough for Michigan State, and I'm really interested to see if they can hang in there and make a game out of it.
As you were saying before, it's hard to win in the shoe.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it'll be tough for Michigan State to win this game in Ohio. Also, it's a 20-point spread leading towards Ohio State. So that's a lot of points if Michigan State even wants to cover.
I think Michigan State might be able to cover. I just don't see them winning. We'll get into why more from the Ohio State perspective. Moving on, 21, Michigan. Better last week. However, they got Iowa this week. And let's just say, in my opinion, I think that this could be do or die for Jim Harbaugh at this point, because if they don't win this game, his chair is probably some burning.
Pretty hot.
Yeah, there's some lava building up beneath his. The volcano's about to burst if they don't win this game. And it might completely blow off the rails if they don't end up being Ohio State at the end of the year.
Can you imagine if they had lost to Army earlier in the year?
Oh
my God.
boy,
And
yeah.
then showed up to Wisconsin with
That was
that
a close
performance.
one. Oh my God.
Although it seemed like in last week's game, and even at the end of the Wisconsin game, somewhat that the offense and Josh Gaddis are starting to finally get it together, click a little bit. Shea Patterson, we know how talented of a quarterback he is. We know the likes of the receivers and the weapons that they have at their disposal with the likes of Tariq Black and Donovan Peoples-Jones. It's just a matter of whether or not Gaddis can, call a game and the Wolverines can execute on offense to win this game. They have the defense. Don Brown is a phenomenal defensive coordinator. It's just whether or not they can do it. And it seems like they just haven't been motivated at all this season. It almost feels like that Ohio State game last year is still weighing them down.
Surprisingly, I had Michigan going to the Final Four this year.
Oh, I did too. I thought
they were going to be phenomenal. The first week, they didn't look great. The Army game killed them, and then losing to Wisconsin, it's just been a downhill slope after that. And think about the games they have to play for the rest of this season. They play Iowa this weekend. They have to play Penn State at Penn State. They have to play Notre Dame at home. They have to play Michigan State at home, and then they have to play Ohio State. That is, 1, 2,
I believe
5, 4, 5 ranked games for the rest of the season. For a team that had the hype and has not been proven, Harbaugh needs to show up and win at least for the Ohio State game being the most important.
The Ohio State game.
If they don't, he's gone. He's gone.
I think if they win the rest and they end the season with 9 or 10 wins, I don't see him going. If they lose to Ohio State, I think then the next year is the telling year. I thought this year was going to be their year, like you said. I had them going to the playoff. I thought that with this whole spread offense that they were going to unleash Shea Patterson and all those NFL caliber wide receivers, and it just hasn't happened. It seems like they don't have an identity on offense, because before it was power football, I formation, play action, and it was extremely frustrating to watch a player like Shea Patterson be shackled like that, and yet this season they haven't fully committed to the spread. I don't see a lot of RPOs being run. It just kind of seems like they don't necessarily know what to do. Even on defense, like the amount of assignments and the gaps that were missed in that Wisconsin game was just unbelievable. Like it's a very frustrating team to watch, and I'm not even a Michigan fan. I just see the talent, and I see them underachieving.
Yeah, couldn't imagine.
Kind of reminds me of the Minnesota Vikings right now. If I had to make an NFL comparison, the talent's there. You've seen it in past years. You've seen flashes, but it hasn't
not
all
clicking.
been coming together. It's not clicking. Yeah. And it's frustrating because you know it's there, and you want to see it as a college football fan,
Exactly.
but it's just not happening yet.
Michigan being good is good for college football. And
Well, yeah, I mean,
not
most of
so
the big
this year.
programs being good for college
Yeah.
football are good. At 20, we'll go into 20 through, let's say 20 through 16 right now. 20, we have the Oklahoma State Cowboys. I almost said Sooners there. That would have pissed off a lot of people. At number 19, the Arizona State Sun Devils. At number 18, UCF. Number 17, Utah. And number 16, Boise State. All right, let's start it with the Cowboys. Good win against a good, solid Kansas State team, 26-13. Chuba Hubbard has been lights out this season. He is absolutely great.
One of the most underrated players in the country, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, no,
Chuba
he's
Hubbard.
putting up, Heisman caliber numbers. He's just not, in the limelight. Obviously, Spencer Sanders so far this year, a freshman quarterback, very inconsistent. However, Mike Gundy's team, they can put up points. Chuba Hubbard is almost at 1,000 yards this season.
It's crazy. 10 touchdowns.
10 TDs. Yeah.
Yeah, this is another one of those teams where I like when they're better because it just makes the competition in the Big 12 that much better. I believe it was when I was younger. I don't remember what year. They were the number 3 team in the country with about a week or two left. They could have easily, I believe that was when Mason Rudolph was their quarterback, if I remember correctly. They were that close to a national championship game. And I don't know why, but this is one of those teams I find it easy to root for simply because they're the little brother in the state of Oklahoma.
Oh,
And you like to see
absolutely.
them be competitive with the big brother.
Exactly.
And now I'm realizing that I completely overlooked Hubbard for Player of the Week. He had 296 yards and a touchdown last week.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Wow,
So
I missed
I'll
that
take
one.
him as my Player of the Week, and Adrian Martinez is still the donkey of the week because he, dropped the ball big time in that one. Oklahoma State, guys, Texas Tech, Baylor, and Iowa, and then at Iowa State. So, their schedule up until Bedlam at the final game of the season is not the most difficult. I think that, their biggest tests are probably at Iowa State and then at home against TCU. So we could be looking at a team that could be fighting for a Big 12 championship spot.
Going into the
Come
final week.
Exactly, going into the final week.
And that would make that Bedlam game that much more interesting, even though it's already going to be a great game.
I wonder if there's a scenario, probably not with Texas, but if you can get Bedlam, and then somehow those are still the top 2 teams, and you get a Bedlam Part 2 in the Big 12 championship.
As entertaining as that might be,
Red River.
I think Red River Rivalry Part 2 is
Yeah,
more
yeah.
entertaining, and I think that's more likely.
That's a lot more likely.
Yeah.
A lot more likely, unless, I think the only way that Bedlam Part 2 would happen would be if Oklahoma beats Texas, and then Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma, right? Well, I guess it wouldn't matter if
'Cause they
Texas
already
won or
lost
not.
to Texas. Oklahoma State already lost to Texas.
Yeah, I think that'd be the only way if they all went out.
Yeah.
But obviously, this is college football.
That's
Chances are one of them is going to drop a game at least.
At least
There are going to be There are going to be upsets, and that's why we love college football.
Crazy things happen.
Shout out to Baylor in first place in the Big 12 right now.
That's a valid point about Baylor. Matt Rule took over an absolute just horrible situation. Like, we're talking about Tennessee being a bad situation and an absolute dumpster fire. The scandal and everything at Baylor was just, it was so horrifying that it put the program where a good coach in Matt Rule went 0-12 his first year. Like, they didn't win any games. They got to a good bowl game. They beat, they won their bowl game if I'm not mistaken, right? Or no, did they lose? I can't remember. But they got to a bowl game last year, and now this year they're undefeated to start the year. They're a good
4-0.
football team.
They just beat I want to say Iowa State.
Yes, they beat Iowa State last year, and that's a good Iowa State team. I had them ranked going into the season. They have one of the better defenses in the Big 12. Matt Campbell is arguably one of the best coaches in the country, very underrated. So you can't deny that. And obviously the Oklahoma State-Baylor game, we might see just how good that Baylor football team is.
They may show up and upset Oklahoma State. Who knows? Crazier things have happened.
And yeah, you have it pulled up right now that the other day, yesterday, they just signed their AD to another 10 years. So another program that looks like they're headed in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to a program we all hope is headed in the right direction, and it looks like it. The Arizona State Sun Devils on Friday night beat the Cal State Golden Bears 24-17. Yet Eno Benjamin 3 touchdowns. The Sun Devils, the defense looked back. The offense is again starting to click week to week. You see the growth of Jaden Daniels. Obviously, he hasn't made a ton of mistakes. However, the offensive playbook is opening it up more and more. You see him throwing the football down the field in chunks more and more. Eno Benjamin starting to get going this season. The offensive line starting to mold and mesh better. I mean, this is a very, very good Arizona State Sun Devils football team.
If you think back to the first week when Arizona State played Kent State at home, Jaden Daniels looked to be padding his stats because he would only throw short 5-yard screen passes. Now that he's starting to grow and Herm Edwards is starting to gain trust in him, you see that he's throwing the ball 20, 30 yards down the field, and that's helping the Arizona State offense move more and put up more points because they only scored 10 against Michigan State. They only scored 19 against Sac State. Now they're starting to put up real football numbers, and Jaden Daniels is definitely looking to grow as a quarterback.
The one thing I'd say I'd be disappointed in is the fact that he didn't get a chance to go and win the game against Colorado.
Yeah.
Obviously, the roughing the holder penalty was dumb. There's no excuse for doing something that's stupid. However, you can't deny that the guy's got ice in his veins. He's a cool, calm, collected, and fast as hell. He's quick as lightning.
Yeah, we first saw the truly special Jaden Daniels in East Lansing, and then he proved it again in Berkeley, in my opinion. And as you mentioned, I wouldn't have been surprised if he would have drove down again and put Arizona State in a position to win that Colorado game. But
my only thing is, as much as I love Jaden Daniels, he had the chance to win that Colorado game with 2 minutes left. He had it served to him on a silver platter, and he threw that. He showed that he was a freshman. He threw that interception to Colorado.
Yeah, and I would say there were 2 plays. Three. There was the sack that he took,
Yeah.
the interception, and then in the second quarter, I believe it was, he didn't read the safeties. The safety had an absolute eye on him. It should have been a pick. They got away with it. I think we ended up with Zendejas might have missed the field goal. Bottom line, it was a opportunity for Colorado to really take a hold of that football game. They did not do it. But yeah, then at the end of the day, the Sun Devils lost that football game, but they are sitting at 3-1 right now. Pac-12 championship, not without reach whatsoever. But they still do have to play USC, Utah, obviously the U of A Territorial Cup game, and then Oregon, Washington State in 2 weeks. So obviously the biggest part of the year for the Sun Devils is not over. The Pac-12 just seems to be a league right now where everyone's just kicking the crap out of each other.
Pac-12 has been fun to watch lately.
yeah, they're beating each other up. That UCLA Washington State game was one of my favorite games I've watched in recent years. That was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. The Pac-12 teams are definitely much more improved. While there isn't an outlier right now that's so much better than everybody else is pretty good. Like, there's no great team, but everyone else is good. At number 18, UCF. I mean, they're probably going to win out. They're probably going to get to a New Year's Six Bowl, and they're probably going to lose that game.
2017 national champions, UCF.
I've never been a believer in that.
Me neither.
UCF isn't as good as they were then, and I think they proved it in that loss against Pitt. While they did blow out Stanford, that Stanford win is looking just less and less because Stanford's been awful this year, which is surprising from a David Shaw coach team. Yes, they did lose their starting quarterback. However, the guy they had backing him up was the number 1 quarterback coming out of high school, ahead of the likes of Tua Tagovailoa, I might add. So, yeah, UCF, they're a good football team. They're going to roll through the American Conference.
Probably win it again.
Dylan Gabriel's looked like mini cheap man's Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, it's just I don't know what else to say about this team. There's just not much else to talk about because we all know what they are. They're not quite where they say they are, but they're not a bad football team. They're a good football team. They're just in the group of 5, and it's kind of holding them back, if you will. 17 Utah. Really, really good defensive line. They were outplayed in that USC game. However, last week they bounced back and they beat Washington State pretty handily.
Yeah. Utah's, to me, they're a good team, but I never understood. There were some preseason picks that put them in the playoff at the end of the year. Lee Corso even picked them to beat either Clemson or Bama. I'm not quite sure, but he had them going all the way to the national championship game. I never really bought into that hype, but they're still a good football team.
Yeah, the problem with Utah I've noticed this year, and it was the one concern I had going into the year about that Utah football team, is when they got behind in a game, was Tyler Huntley going to be able to make the plays down the field to win them football games? And so far this season, he hasn't been able to do that in every game, which is probably why they lost to USC. USC had the talent to beat them. They had the players on the outside with, the likes of the NFL players, NFL caliber wide receivers with Michael Pittman Jr., Tyler Vaughns, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and those guys, and they got outplayed by the Trojans. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not they make it to the Pac-12 championship game. I think every team in the Pac-12 South right now, with the exception of UCLA probably, has, the cachet and the talent to go and win the conference. I mean, everyone else is kind of just in a jumble for that title.
Yeah, the Pac-12 is wide open for me right now.
I think
Other than Oregon State, UCLA, and Stanford.
I think anybody could take that spot in the Rose Bowl.
Exactly.
It's completely wide open. I don't think they're going to get a playoff team. However, like we've been talking about, the Pac-12 is a lot better this year, and I think we're going to continue to see an upward trend. It's just going to be whether or not someone can make that step forward. We thought it could have been Oregon. We thought it could have been Utah. Obviously, it hasn't happened this season. But we'll see if someone can really push for the playoff in the coming years. I think if Jacob Eason stays, Washington might have a shot. We'll talk about them a little bit later. USC, with JT Daniels coming back next year and all that talent that they have. We'll see if Clay Helton is the right coach for that, though. But they might have a shot. Stanford, David Shaw. So, there are teams that can make a push. Maybe even Arizona State with all these top recruits and, one of the youngest teams in the entire country. Yeah, exactly. Herm Edwards in every press conference basically says, we're playing 28 freshmen. Jaden Daniels, right now, I think is better than Manny Wilkins was as a senior last year. And I have complete confidence in saying that. Mm-hmm. And he is 18 years old.
He's only going to get better, too.
Exactly.
You see the things he's doing now, and then you think we still see some of those freshman mistakes, as George mentioned earlier, but those flashes of brilliance that we see, that's when we go, he's only a freshman.
Exactly.
He's only going to get better.
Oh, he can take this program to new heights.
Exactly.
Moving on to another team with a freshman quarterback in Hank Bachmeier, Boise State. How do you guys feel about the Broncos? Because I just see another Boise State team. Good, not great. They're a good football team, well coached.
Similar to UCF. It's just group of 5.
Exactly.
But they're ranked both in the top 25 for offense and defense, so they're a pretty well-rounded football team at the moment. But my only problem is they don't really play anybody. So you can't give them the quality wins to put them up in the rankings. They're just kind of like a great comparison was to that UCF team.
Alrighty, now into the top 15. At 15, the Iowa Hawkeyes, who obviously have that big matchup against the Wolverines this upcoming weekend. 14, Washington, coming off the USC win. 13, the highest-ranked Pac-12 team that we have in our rankings, the Oregon Ducks. Number 12, Penn State. And number 11, Florida. All right, we'll start with Iowa. Obviously, they got that big Michigan game this weekend. Again, another one of those teams where they're good. I don't think they're great. Nate Stanley's a good quarterback, however, mistake-prone. He's cost them some games in years past. However, they did have that Iowa State win. Crazy game. Obviously, probably the worst way to lose a football game with two of your guys colliding and, the ball just dropping down. It was kind of disappointing. being that, the game had a lot of hype, and it would have been fun to see if Brock Purdy could have led the Cyclones down the field to win the game. That being said, Iowa can run the football. They play good defense.
Great defense. They have a top 5 defense in the country.
Yeah.
And I guess it's going to be a real test because they have to go into Ann Arbor and beat Michigan, who's looking to, as we talked about earlier, they're looking to prove themselves. Everybody counted them out. They want to be right back in. You'll hop on that bandwagon? Okay. But
prove me wrong.
Iowa, they have to go into Ann Arbor and beat Michigan. I think the top 5 defense in the country could help them do that. But as you said, they're able to run the ball. But it'll be hard to beat Michigan. I'm still, as much as they disappointed me this season, I think I'd take Michigan over Iowa in that game.
I said earlier, I'm a believer in home field, and that still rings true. I'm not a believer in Michigan. They've disappointed me this season, but like you just said, winning in Michigan is still no easy task, especially at the Big House in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, so like we said, I think it's going to be a really good one to watch for. We'll get into some game picks nearing the end of the show, so we'll really give you our predictions for that game, if you will. Number 14, we had Washington. The Huskies beat a pretty darn good USC team. With that being said, who are on their third-string quarterback, you could say was possibly their 4th best quarterback going into the year because Jack Sears did enter the transfer portal following their quarterback competition in the fall. But this Chris Peterson team is a darn good football team. And Jacob Eason is a really, really talented quarterback. He's just somewhat inconsistent.
Yeah, I think this team would easily be on. This is not an excuse. I'd like to open with that. It's not an excuse. You have to be ready to play no matter what. But the only Washington loss was at home against Cal, where there was a 2.5-hour lightning delay. They started the game, played about 5 minutes. I think the delay really threw them off in that game, and I think they would have won had it continued on regularly scheduled programming. Again, that's not an excuse, though, for Chris Peterson. You have to have your guys ready. But this is a team that is easily one of the best in the Pac-12, right up there with Oregon, in my opinion.
Yeah, and talking about number 13, Oregon, right above them. I think they're, just above. I think their loss was a little bit better because being that Auburn is the top 10 football team right now.
SEC team.
Exactly. Justin Herbert's looked better in recent weeks. Yeah, they got an offensive line is one of the better ones in the country. C.J. Verdell's a decent wide receiver or a decent running back. I think they play decent defense. This is another team that their season's not over.
Exactly.
I mean, yes, they're a long shot to still make the playoff, as is Washington, ASU even, because, we're still early in the season, and these teams have one loss. Mm-hmm. So they're not out of it.
And it's not uncommon.
Anytime you have one loss, you have a chance.
Oh, yeah, a one-loss
Especially
conference
with help.
champion with help can make it into the playoff for whatever reason. I don't know if the Pac-12 is going to be able to get it done. I don't think it's going to happen. But, a one-loss conference champion is definitely not out of the playoff picture. Mm-hmm. With that being said, we'll go to an undefeated Big 12 team who hasn't really been tested by a great team, Penn State. They should have lost to Pitt. I still believe that. But at the end of the day, they got the job done, and they're sitting at 4-0. They're going to play Purdue this week. I think they win that game, but we're really going to see what this Penn State team really is when they go play Iowa, Michigan, and then Michigan State in three
back to back.
Yeah, in 3 consecutive games.
2 out of those 3 games are on the road too, which will be tough for them.
Yeah, they're just another one of those teams that's gonna. We're gonna see how the dice rolls.
Exactly.
Everything's gonna work itself out because we got a lot of teams in our top 15 that are gonna end up playing each other. And right now, you're just kind of like, they looked better than this guy, but you're just not really sure. It's all going to play out on the field.
Yeah.
I always find Penn State, in my opinion, to be a little bit overrated. I feel like, think about who they've played so far this season. They played Idaho, Buffalo, Pitt, and Maryland. As you said before, they should have lost that Pitt game. Other than that, those 3 other teams, they absolutely steamrolled them because they're not huge college football schools.
That Maryland hype train in the first couple of weeks of the season was rolling.
Yeah, that was on the.
They're back to earth now, though.
Yeah. So, but I think for Penn State to prove that they're the real deal, they need to win all 3 of these games to even be considered a real deal.
I just don't see it happening. They're not as good as they have been in years past. There's no Trace McSorley, and there's obviously no Saquon Barkley. So
I think they could take the Iowa game.
Yeah.
But I don't
know about Michigan.
I don't know if they'll beat Michigan or Michigan
Yeah,
State.
I see Penn State being a team that ends the season with 3, maybe 4 losses.
Yeah.
I don't see
year.
they got to go to Columbus later too.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening.
Don't get me wrong. This is a team that could pull off an upset in those games, and their opponents must be on high alert. And they could do it. I just don't necessarily see them winning the big games consistently this year. Mm-hmm. And now we'll move into number 11, the Florida Gators. Another win. They did lose Felipe Franks for the year, their starting quarterback. While he was very inconsistent, he did have a little bit of magic in him, and he could pull something off and win a football game for you. We saw it against Michigan in the New Year's Six Bowl last year. We've seen it in the years past. Now they have Kyle Trask. He's been solid so far, but I'm not sure if he has that ability to go and win you a football game in the fourth quarter, to come up with a crazy first down on 4th and 10, to throw the ball down the field and create this bomb to spark you back on a comeback, which Felipe Franks did have in his locker.
Florida definitely has its toughest matchup of the season this week against number 7 Auburn.
Arguably the game of the week.
Arguably the game day's there. So
yeah.
It's going to be the game of the week. So I think they're going to really show themselves this week. If they're the real deal, they will show and they will beat Auburn. I don't know if they're going to beat Auburn, but they need to show up if they want to even be considered the real deal in the Pac-12. Also, the week after that, they have to go to Death Valley and play LSU.
No days off. You have a tough matchup this week.
Exactly.
And then in 2 weeks after that LSU game, you have Georgia, who's always a threat in the SEC. So
again, another one of these guys that we're just going to see it play out. Florida has a legit defense. Their pass rush is, they're a top 30 defense in the country, I'd say. Maybe a little higher. I'm not sure exactly what their rating is, but they do have a very good defense. Their pass rush, like I said, can get after the quarterback and disrupt an opposing offense. So we'll have to see how Bo Nix and the Auburn offense handles it, because I do think that Florida is going to cause Auburn some problems. Mm-hmm. I just think the difference in that game is going to be Bo Nix and Kyle Trask.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Florida is a team in the SEC East, in my opinion, always has a good chance to reach the SEC championship. Mm-hmm. Of course, assuming they win some of these games.
It's them and
Georgia.
Exactly
at
the
the
moment.
East. And then once you get to that SEC championship game, probably against Bama, let's be real, anything can happen in those one-game winner-take.
Exactly. Like I've been saying the whole episode. It's college football. Stuff happens.
Yeah.
We have no idea how this season's going to go. We're just speculating.
It's all going to play out.
Exactly. We've seen these guys that just put a bunch of cupcakes in nobodies, and they've steamrolled them. We don't know what type of actual team they are when someone hits them in the mouth. It's the fourth quarter, and you got to drive down the field to win a football game.
In a road,
on
in
a
tough
road.
environment.
Exactly. Tough fans.
To be fair, Kyle Trask did do that against Kentucky earlier this season.
But can he do it at LSU?
That's the point.
Georgia.
That's the point.
Or if he makes the SEC championship game in Atlanta against Bama.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
not to take it away from him. That was a great...
I wouldn't say P. Ryan's quite been the running back we've all think he has. He hasn't produced quite as much. He hasn't even had 200 yards in the season so far, and only 3 touchdowns. So the run game hasn't quite been what it is. But Dan Mullen is a good play caller on the offensive side of the ball, and it's a good Florida team. Like we said, it'll just play itself out.
It seems like a lot of these 11 to kind of 20-ish teams we've been saying, they're pretty good, but we're going to find out how good.
Exactly. And even some of these teams towards the top. One of those teams that we do know is a darn good football team is at number 10. That's Texas at number 9, Notre Dame, number 8, Wisconsin, and number 7, Auburn. All of these teams have played a big-time opponent. We know that these teams are legit. Texas, they fell to LSU.
They played really well.
They played really well. They could have won that football game. There were 2 fourth and goals that they really should have gotten, and they were just really bad drops.
Well, losing to LSU in the second week of the season definitely, I don't think it hurt Texas because I think a one-loss team out of the Big 12 is still a good thing for college football, especially if your one loss is to arguably one of the best teams in the country, LSU. So that for Texas was not a good thing. We're going to see they play at West Virginia this week, and if you remember last year, West Virginia came into Texas and won that big game. So they don't have the same talent that they had last year, but I still think that game could go either way. And then the week after that, we have the Red River rivalry. So we'll see how Texas is really able to handle themselves against the Oklahoma Sooners.
Yeah, Texas, I was really impressed with them. Despite, we mentioned they lost to LSU, obviously. I was still really impressed with the way they play. You mentioned a one-loss Big 12 team. We saw it with Oklahoma last year. If you win the Big 12 with one loss, chances are you're probably going to make it in, especially over a one-loss Pac-12 team. So
Exactly. Go ahead.
I'm really interested to see if Texas can run the table.
Yeah, like we said, I think it's going to come down to them at Oklahoma in the Big 12. Sam Ehlinger versus Jalen Hurts. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into it, but Texas does have probably the best defense in the Big 12. I think they do have the best defense in the Big 12. Oklahoma's defense is not even comparable by any sorts of the imagination. So, again, a team not out of the playoff. They just got to take care of business, beat the teams that are placed in front of them, beat Oklahoma probably twice, which is no easy feat.
Beat them twice.
Exactly. You're going to have to beat Oklahoma twice, and you can get to the playoff. But it's just a question of whether or not they can do it. Moving on to number 9, Notre Dame. They lost a close game to Georgia a couple weeks ago, rebounded pretty well against Virginia. It was close right at the beginning, but they started to run away with it, ended up winning by 2 scores at a score of 35-20. This is a darn good football team. It's one of the better Notre Dame teams that we've seen. Ian Book is a legit quarterback. He can pick up yardage with his legs. He's got a very good arm. He can throw the ball down the field. And they have a defense.
Notre Dame, to me, they got a lot of slack for losing last year to Clemson in the semifinal. But I think people forget Clemson's a darn good football team. They beat Bama by 28 as well. So people give Notre Dame, I've heard some people say, well, they're an indendependent.
They should never be allowed in the
playoff. They win
playoff.
undefeated. Paul Fine, yeah.
That is an absolute bogus comment. I'm sorry. I know Paul Feinbaum is, he's really respected, and we can only hope to have the success that he's had. But that was a bit out of bounds. Like, come on. Like, Notre Dame is a good football team. Sorry they weren't Clemson and Trevor Lawrence, who beat Alabama, by 4 scores.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to disagree with both of you here.
Okay.
I think Notre Dame is notorious for being embarrassing in big games. Let's think back. They lost by 28 to Clemson. I know Alabama lost by 28 to Clemson also. But if you go back to their last performance in a big game before when they played Alabama, that was an absolute blowout. I still think Notre Dame is a good football team this year. They went down. The best game of the year so far, or one of the best games, was their game in Georgia. It's hard to win in Athens. But they play Michigan. They play USC, they play Michigan. And we talk about the entire podcast. Michigan has just been underwhelming the entire season. So I really don't see Notre Dame.
I don't see them making the playoff this year.
But I'm going to have, when you guys were saying that bogus comment by Paul, I love Paul Feinbaum. He's one of my heroes. I think I agree with him on that. They've kind of been embarrassing to college football. The college football gods love when Notre Dame's in it because it's good for the sport. But I agree with Paul that they've kind of been
I can't punish one team because they didn't perform in 2012. There've been 2 full recruiting classes. That was almost 8 years ago, man. It's just I find it hard to believe that people like that are holding it against him. It doesn't make any sense to me. These are completely new players. Obviously, last year, you can't deny the fact that they got blown out by Clemson.
But so did Bama.
Exactly. So did Alabama. Notre Dame is a very good football team. Brian Kelly is a very good head coach. That game against Georgia was winnable. They had a shot to win the game. They had the ball with a minute left, down a touchdown. They had a chance to win that game. In fact, they probably could have won that game. couple plays here, a couple plays there, and they win that football game in Athens in probably the most impressive win of the season. Like, if they win that game, they're probably in the top 4 or 5. And no, in fact, they are in the top 4 or 5.
They were 7 when they lost that game, correct?
I believe so.
So Georgia would have dropped. They would have probably rise and probably jumped a team or two because of a top 3 win.
Exactly.
Another team that is a really good football team in the trenches, the Wisconsin Badgers, undefeated right now. Obviously, their marquee win so far this season has been the just complete and utter domination where they steamrolled the Wolverines. They got Michigan State this week. We know they can run the football. We know their offensive line is good. I think the question for them, and it's been the question all season, is whether or not Jack Cohn can throw the ball down the field when called upon.
Think about these scores that Wisconsin has put up. Against USF, 49-0. Versus CMU, 61-0. Versus Michigan, 35-14. Versus Northwestern, 24-15. I'm not going to lie. Kent State does not stand a chance against Wisconsin Badgers this week. They're going to go...
Oh, sorry. Yeah, they play Kent State, not Michigan State. My
That's
bad.
the week after. It's okay. But I think this Wisconsin team, they're good. But as you said, can Jack Cohen throw the ball? That's the big question for him. He only has 805 passing yards and 5 touchdowns and a 69.5 QBR. We're
talking about the quarterback, and obviously that makes a difference when they're down. However, we can't deny the fact that Jonathan Taylor is arguably the best player in the entire country. I mean, the guy is just great. Like, Jonathan Taylor is one of the best players in the country. There's no denying that. He absolutely ran all over that Michigan team. I mean, the guy, as a freshman, rushed for more yards than anyone in the history of college football. Again, his sophomore year, he rushed for more yards than anyone in the history of college football. And he's been pretty darn good so far this year.
Yeah, so far through 4 games, his lowest output has been 102 yards. That's his lowest.
That's still a great game.
And he put up 203 against that Michigan defense. NFL talent. It certainly helps. We talk quarterback so much, but it certainly helps when you have a guy like that who you can hand it off to.
Yeah, he's their leader, and you can't deny the fact that this is probably the best Wisconsin defense, at least that I've seen in my lifetime. Jim Leonard has these guys flying all over the field. They're fast, they're physical, they can get after the quarterback, they can rush the passer, they're decent, they're pretty good in pass coverage. We saw that pretty heavily against Michigan, where they just did not really let Michigan back into that football game until garbage time. So I think this is a really, really good Wisconsin Badgers team. It's just whether or not they can beat Ohio State.
October 26th, they go to Columbus. I feel like a broken record, but we're going to find out.
Everybody keeps going to Columbus to prove themselves.
Exactly. And that'll be a prove-it game for Ohio State, who hasn't really played anyone so far this year yet. They've been one of the most impressive teams in the entire country. Number 7, Auburn. Obviously, they got that big game this weekend, Florida. How do you feel about the Tigers?
I like them.
They're good. I think that they have such a tough schedule coming up. They have to, after this, they came in, they won, they beat Oregon.
Beat A&M.
They beat A&M. They have to play LSU in 2 weeks. They have to play Georgia. And then they have to play the Crimson Tide to end the season. That's 3 of the best teams in college football, in my opinion. And as much as Auburn looks good, I don't know how good they're gonna do in those games. Like going to LSU, because I'm pretty sure they play on the road. I'm sounding like a broken record. Also, I think Death Valley is the hardest place to win a football game, in my opinion, just because how crazy the LSU fans are and how loud the stadium is. So this Auburn team, they'd prove themselves if they beat LSU, and I definitely think they'd have a spot in the playoff.
I don't think they're going to make playoff. I think this is a really good Auburn team. They have probably the best defense in the entire country. Bo Nix has looked absolutely clutch. He's got 980 passing yards, 7 touchdowns compared to only 2 interceptions. And, when the times are, at the times when it's the toughest, when the lights are brightest, he's stepped up. And he's going to have to continue to do that if they want to make the playoff. It's just they have to play LSU, who, in my opinion, I'll get to it more, but they've been one of, if not the best team on the field so far this year. They still got to play Georgia, and they got to play in the Iron Bowl against Alabama. This is a realistic. We could see them losing 3 games this year and still being a freaking good team.
Yeah.
It's
I could
just
see them with 3 losses and still being in the top 25 because of the quality.
I could make an argument for top 15 even with 3
top, you
losses.
could say possibly top 10 when everything works itself out.
Best 3-loss team in the country.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, they're a good team. Gus Malzahn back on play calling duties. You know, they can run the football. They got a running back in Jatarvius Whitlow. A little bit of a struggle for some reason for me to say right there, but you know, we know what this team is capable of. They're good enough to beat Florida this weekend. I think they beat Florida this weekend, and I think they can beat LSU, and I think they might be able to beat Alabama. Will it happen? I'm not sure. It's going to be. I don't think they get through the schedule. I think eventually, you know, while they may come up with an upset, eventually their luck will run out. Bo Nix is eventually going to make a mistake. He is a freshman. As much as I love Bo Nix, and as much as I've been praising him this season, he's going to make a mistake at some point. He's going to cause them.
Especially against teams like LSU and Alabama and Georgia.
You can't make a mistake against Alabama's defense. You can't make a mistake against Georgia. They will make you pay.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think the one thing going for Auburn this year is that out of their 3 games, out of their 3 big games in the season, they're playing 2 of them at home. Auburn is good at playing at home, so I think playing Georgia and Alabama at home, I don't know if they can beat either of them, but I wouldn't be shocked if they were able to steal one of those games.
They pulled it off a few years ago.
Yeah.
I believe.
They did.
If I remember correctly. And then they lost to Georgia in the rematch in the SEC championship game. But they were talking about having a 2-loss Auburn team
in the playoff
because they beat Georgia.
Crazier stuff has happened to Jordan Hare. We all remember the crazy miracles at Jordan Hare's. Exactly.
Another Georgia game, the tipped 4th and 18.
Exactly, the one they beat the Aaron Murray Georgia team. Yeah. Nick Marshall and those boys. So yeah, they're a good football team. Again, they're gonna have to prove it whether or not they're gonna play out. They're gonna be. I don't think they do it.
That's the theme of today's show.
Exactly, it's gonna play out. It's the theme. It's early in college football.
Yeah.
Like we haven't really gotten into the hard, the heart of the season. Exactly. There haven't been a ton of dog fights so far this season. Now we're gonna get in to our own individual rankings before we reveal the show's top 6. George, we'll start with you. Why don't you just give us, your rankings, where you differed from, the rankings we had as a committee.
All right. So at 25, I agreed that Cal should be at 25. For 24, I had Michigan State. 23, I put Virginia above Michigan State. That differed from the show. 22, Wake Forest. 21, Oklahoma State. 20, Michigan. I had them one higher than the show had them. Number 19, Arizona State. I agreed with that. 18, UCF. 17, Utah. 16, Boise State. 15, Washington. 14, Iowa. 13, Oregon. Number 12, Penn State. Notre Dame at 11. Texas at 10. Florida at 9, Wisconsin at 8, and Oklahoma at 7.
You can give us your top 6. Go. You can
just
go all the way to 1. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Auburn at 6, and then at 5 I had the Oklahoma State Buckeyes, or Ohio State Buckeyes. Sorry, that was a bad slip up. LSU at 4, Georgia at 3, Clemson at 2, and the Alabama Crimson Tide at 1.
So a lot of my top 25 is the same. Also had Cal, Virginia, Wake Forest at 25, 24, and 23. I had Michigan State flip-flop with Michigan at 21. I had Michigan State being the better team. Arizona State at 20. I agree. Or actually, I also have Arizona State and Oklahoma State flipped. I put Oklahoma State above Arizona State. I put OK State at 19, ASU at 20. 18, I had Utah, which pretty much same as the total compiled rankings. 17, I had Boise State, UCF at 16. 15, I had Iowa. 13 and 14 and 15, all the same. Oregon, Washington, Iowa. 10, 11, 12, I had the same. Texas, Florida, Penn State. I had Texas in that top 10 over Florida. Notre Dame, Wisconsin at 9 and 8, and Auburn at 7. The top 6 is where things get a little more, I don't want to say tricky, because I do believe it's a clear-cut top 6 or 7 teams in the country. It's just a matter of where you're going to rank them for now. I had Oklahoma at 6, Ohio State at 5, LSU at 4, Georgia 3, Bama at 2, and I left Clemson at number 1 simply because of that A&M win earlier in the year.
I mean, yeah, I see where you're coming from. I did have Alabama and Clemson flipped. I had Alabama number 1. We'll get to that when I get to the top. Number 25, I had Cal. 24, Wake Forest. 23, I had the Aggies from Texas A&M. I think Jimbo Fisher's a good head coach. I really like Kellen Mond. He's starting to put things together. Really talented football team. However, I do see where you guys are coming from. They have 2 losses.
2 losses, definitely.
22, UCF. Not quite so high on them. I think the Pitt loss is a really, really bad look. 21, Oklahoma State. 20, Michigan. 19, Michigan State. 18, Arizona State. 17, Utah. 16, Boise State. 15, Iowa. 14, Washington. 13, Penn State. 12, Oregon. 11, the Gators. 10, the Longhorns. Number 9, Notre Dame. Number 8, Auburn. Number 7, Wisconsin. And then the top 6, I started with Oklahoma at 6, Georgia at 5, Ohio State 4, LSU 3, Clemson 2, and then Alabama 1. Here's the show's top 6 now. We'll get into that. So the whole compiled rankings from the committee, as we're calling ourselves here on the show. You know, we're the real college football playoff committee. Oh, man, excuse me. A little bit sick. Stuff's going around ASU. It happens. All right, number 6, Oklahoma. Number 5, Ohio State. Number 4, Georgia. Number 3, LSU. Number 2, Clemson. And then number 1, Alabama. So far this season, Clemson has been atop of Alabama. I think a lot of that had to do with people just remembering what happened in the national championship game of last year. And so far this season, Alabama has been more consistent than Clemson. Trevor Lawrence is talented and as good as I think he is. And I think
hasn't been as good as
he hasn't played the best. With that being said, he hasn't needed to.
He hasn't needed to with that team.
Exactly. Alabama's been crushing everybody, as we expected. Yeah, but with all that being said, I think LSU has been the best football team on the field this season. Joe Burrow, I think, is arguably leading the Heisman race. I think he's the most improved player from a season ago. Coach O, I love Coach O. And then I think the second best team and the second most impressive team on the field has been Ohio State.
Mm-hmm. I was honestly kind of close to putting Ohio State at 1, but I figured that'd be a bit of a reach simply because, as you mentioned, best team on the field doesn't always match up with the polls.
Exactly.
For a number of reasons, whether it be strength of schedule, strength of victory, opponents, all that, injuries, you know. But Ohio State to me has certainly been beyond impressive. I did not expect this level of production from Justin Fields. I believe he has 23 total touchdowns and over 1,300 total yards through, well, they've played 4 or 5 games. That's insane to me. I understand the level of competition, but for a transfer quarterback
in his
who
first
didn't
year in a
start at
system, exactly. Justin Fields has been great.
Yes.
And we know that the defense that they have with the likes of Chase Young, who's going to be playing on Sundays, Jeff Okudah, a defensive back, is going to be playing on Sundays. Ryan Day is a very good offensive mind. He's learned from one of the best, college football coaches of all time in Urban Meyer, and the Buckeyes just haven't missed a beat. We'll see whether or not Ryan Day's ready for the big time, in the big games. They play Michigan State this week in a primetime matchup. That'll be a tough one. But so far this season, like I said, they've been the second most impressive team to me via the eye test, and the most impressive team for me has been LSU. I think the Tigers I think they're loaded this season. I think they can beat Alabama. I don't know if they will, but I think it'll come down to the wire. And I think the reason they can is now that their offense has evolved into a modern offense. Joe Burrow this season is throwing the football down the field to just great weapons. Justin Jefferson, brother of a former LSU quarterback Jordan Jefferson from those years where they went to the national championship and everything, is a very, very good wide receiver. Defensively, they have arguably the best player in the entire country in Grant Delpit. And Coach O can win you any big game. He'll fire you up. He'll scream and yell. He won't have a voice in his post-game press conference. And like I said, I think the Tigers are a very, very good football team. And I wouldn't be shocked if they beat Alabama.
Can they beat Alabama? Yes. Will they beat Alabama? No. Nick Saban, he is on some sort of mission this year. He essentially, after the loss to Clemson, there's just been something. He got hip surgery, and now he's a different man. So everybody remember 2 years ago when Tua came in the fourth or the second half and saved that national championship game against Georgia. Everybody thought he was the greatest quarterback to ever walk the planet. They thought he was going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then the next year, he comes in, he has an amazing season, he hurts his ankle, they lose the national championship, and everybody essentially puts him under Trevor Lawrence. Which, I'm not doubting Trevor Lawrence's skill, but I think that Alabama being considered an underdog in college football, which we never hear of, that motivated Nick Saban and the Alabama Crimson Tide to just push that team forward, and I don't think there's anybody stopping them this year.
Yeah. You mentioned how Tua was put under Trevor after that national championship game, that performance.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason that Miami Dolphins fans are saying tank for Tua and not tank for Trevor. Tua is on pace for, I believe, almost 70 touchdowns this season, which he probably won't keep that pace. Like, he won't heading into SEC play.
Exactly.
But that just shows how good of a level he's played at the beginning of the year. November 9th, LSU at Alabama. Mark your calendars.
Everybody.
Baby, I'm excited for it. Yeah, we haven't really talked about Oklahoma. A former Alabama quarterback, Jalen Hurts, has absolutely been killing it. He's in the
Heisman votes.
Yeah, exactly. Are they going to get 3 back-to-back Heisman winners? All transfers. Lincoln Riley's the best play caller from the offensive side of the ball in college football. He's probably one of the best minds in the entire country in any level of football in terms of offense. The question for them is whether or not they can play defense. They have one of the worst pass defenses in the entire country. They can't really get after the quarterback too often. But they score, and they score a lot. They got a lot of weapons on offense. Jalen Hurts has looked so much better with his arm. We all know what he can do with his legs. He's a very, very, very powerful runner. They got Trey Sermon, who's a very good running back. And they got CeeDee Lamb, who's going to be playing on Sundays in a year.
Going back to what you said about Oklahoma's defense, I just pulled it up. According to the NCAA, they're ranked 47th out of 50 in the country for defense. So that may hurt them as a football team.
No, it will hurt them. It's just whether or not it will cost them.
Exactly.
They kind of, I keep making NFL comparisons. They kind of remind me of the Chiefs a little bit in the NFL, where you have this high-powered offense, but once you get to the playoff, that defense.
It's just like if you could play defense.
That defense is what's.
They'd be unstoppable.
It's going to
Exactly.
cost you. It's going to cost you.
Oh, it will cost them for sure.
Unless they fix it, or score 70, whichever one.
They got to average 70 a game.
Exactly, and like we said though, this whole thing will work itself out, and it comes down to the fact that LSU and Georgia play each other, Alabama, LSU play each other, and Auburn, Alabama, the SEC championship game, whether that be Georgia, Florida, they're going to play the SEC West champion. So I think it's all going to work itself out. I don't see 2 SEC teams getting into the playoff.
Not
really.
Not with the level that they're going to beat each other up at.
I think
with the way the matchups line up this year.
If Ohio State comes in undefeated and Oklahoma comes in undefeated, I don't see a way that an LSU team with a loss gets in. There's a way.
Depending on the loss.
I think if LSU loses to Alabama close, Alabama wins out. They beat Georgia in the championship game, and LSU beats Georgia. I could see a one-loss LSU team getting in, but that is the only, or maybe one last Alabama team and vice versa, get into the national championship, or the college football playoff, excuse me. But like we said, chances are crazy stuff's going to happen. People are going to lose. People are going to get helped out. Teams are going to fall apart. You never know. One player can go down with injury, and next thing you know, they completely capitulate and fall apart.
I'm super excited.
Yes.
for the
Oh,
rest
we're
of this conference.
finally getting into the fun weeks.
Exactly.
We've had a couple good games every weekend, but we haven't really had those weeks where they're just 3-4 dogfights of ranked
back
teams.
to back to back.
Exactly.
Once conference play kicks in, ooh, that's gonna be fun.
It's starting to come around. It's starting to come this week. So now we're gonna get into, a little bit of a game picks for the upcoming weekend for our next little preview. LSU's got a bit of a tough game. Utah State's a good football team. Jordan Love, legit NFL prospect. Well, I think Joe Burrow's probably been the best quarterback in the country, you could say. It's not going to be an easy game. I do think, though, LSU gets the job done. I think they win by multiple touchdowns.
Yeah, the spread is 26.5.
I'm taking LSU.
I don't know if it'll be 26.5, but I do think they'll win heavily. Alrighty.
Oklahoma at Kansas. The
Yeah.
Les Miles train.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that one. That's just going to – Oklahoma's going to
Oklahoma's
steamroll. Oklahoma will steamroll them.
The over/under is 67.5, and I'll take the over on that
Oklahoma's
game.
going to get 67.
Alrighty. Michigan, Iowa.
That's a good game.
Who do you guys like in that one?
The line is 3.5
For Michigan.
for Michigan, and I think we keep bringing this up, me and Dylan. Home field advantage. I think going to Ann Arbor is a hard place to win, and I think Michigan is hungry. They're looking to prove themselves, so I'd take Michigan in that game.
So they got home field. This is a game they have to win. This is a game Jim Harbaugh needs to win. So I'm going to pick Iowa.
Really?
I'm going to go Iowa in this one.
Interesting.
Not so fast. For the exact same reasons, I'm picking the Wolverines. I think that Shea Patterson, he's going to be a little bit more healthy this week. There's that cough again. But yeah, I think for the reasons you just said, it is a must-win. I think Jim Harbaugh is going to have his boys ready to go, and I do think they're able to pull out this win. And I think it's going to be close. I know it's going to be close. I want it to be a close game. And I think Michigan does get the job done. I know I've been saying that all season. I picked them to go to the playoff. But in this specific game, I do think they beat the Hawkeyes. Now, we'll go to Michigan State, Ohio State before we talk about the biggest game of the weekend. Does Michigan State keep this game close? Because the line right now is 20 in the favor of Ohio State. We just can't deny the fact that Michigan State has possibly the best defense in the entire country. They have the best run defense. Are they going to be able to neutralize J.K. Dobbins? And if they're able to completely neutralize that run game, will Justin Fields be able to pick them apart in the secondary?
I think that Michigan State can and will keep this game close. I think the 20-point spread that's Michigan State's defense is too good for the spread to be that large. I'm still taking Ohio State, but I think Michigan State will keep it close. I think that could be a top game for the weekend.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. 20 seems a little lopsided to me, especially with that defense. But, again, we keep talking home field advantage. This game is in Columbus. It's Ohio State. They've looked great through 5 games. I think Ohio State wins, but Michigan State will cover.
I agree. Now, before we do, I agree. I think, Ohio State, I think they win that game. I think they win close. I think Michigan State makes it a game. I think Brian Lewerke makes some plays down the field to Stewart Jr. that really test Ohio State. This is their first real test of the year, and I think we're going to see that Ohio State is a really good football team. I think they're going to prove to us that they are a good team, and I think they win that game. Before we get into the biggest game of the weekend, where game day's at, Auburn, Florida, I just want to point out that I think that Purdue, Penn State, upset alert. I really think that Purdue can pull off this game. They do have the players to do it. Elijah Sindelar, their starting quarterback for the Boilermakers, is questionable for this game. We'll see if he's able to play or not, but they do have the players. And I'm honestly thinking about Rondale Moore. We saw what he did to Ohio State last year. Mm-hmm. I think he could do it to a Penn State team this week. So, I don't know if it'll happen, but
I can see it happening.
I just don't see Penn State blowing them out.
Yeah, I don't know about this one either, especially with the Garbers injury, but Cal goes to Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
Justin Herbert versus that Cal secondary and that Cal defense is an interesting matchup this weekend for me. I don't know if Cal can pull it off, especially at Autzen. Autzen is a very tough stadium to win at and to play at as an opponent. I don't know if they can pull it off, but it's certainly going to be an interesting game within the game for me on Saturday.
Now the game of the weekend. The Auburn Tigers versus the Florida Gators in Gainesville. George, who do you like?
Well, both teams are averaging lots of points per game this year. Auburn has 38 points a game, and Florida is averaging 34 points a game. Right now, the spread is 2.5, Auburn. So, I'm torn. The Gators have been looking really, really good this year, but for some reason, I think it'll be hard to bet against the Tigers. I think Auburn, Bo Nix, I think they're too good this year. Bo Nix has 980 yards and 7 touchdowns. I think I'm going to take the Tigers.
We've been talking Bo Nix and how he's looked phenomenal as a freshman. This could be a game where he makes those. We start to see that he truly is a freshman and some of those freshman mistakes. I'm going to say Florida here, simply because it's in the swamp. I'm going to predict. I hate to predict against someone, but as we said, Nix is going to have one of those games eventually. I think it'll be this Saturday.
Again, as Lee Corso would say, not so fast. Bo Nix, Bo Nix, Bo Nix. I think that Auburn wins this game. I think they pull away in the fourth quarter. I think they win by more than a score. I think they win by a touchdown to 10 points. I don't think it's going to be – I think it'll come down to the wire, but I think in the end, the Tigers will pull through with some cushion.
Some comfort.
Yeah, some comfort. Bo Nix, I agree with you. He's eventually going to make a mistake. He's risky. He throws it in dumb places. He's probably going to throw an interception in this game.
You don't think it'll be this week?
I think that in the clutch, Bo Nix is too darn good. I think if, for whatever reason, they're down 7 points or they're down 3 with a minute left, I think he drives them down the field and I think he wins the football game. So, yeah, 100%. I'm super excited for this weekend. This is possibly the first weekend where there are so many good football games on the way. Boys, thank you so much for coming on.
Do you
guys have any closing comments before we wrap things up?
I'm really excited for this college football weekend. So many good games, and I'm hoping that they're all close. And an upset would be nice to maybe throw some fire into the committee's pool.
Yeah, I would love to see some upset somewhere to at least mix these rankings up a little bit. And I'm going to say it again. It's all going to play out, and we're going to find out sooner or later.
This weekend's going to be crazy. I'm excited. You're excited. For Dylan Wilhelm and George Boyle, I'm Chas Messman. I'll see you guys next week. Peace!